Do you think life is simpler as time evolves? For some, it can be more complicated when facing issues about health, estate plans, probate, long-term care, and more. That's why Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell hosts ElderTalk with TuckerAllen, providing intelligent answers for those thinking about their future. This next segment of the ElderTalk show focuses on the conservatorship of Britney Spears and all of the twists and turns along the way. Well, another twist and turn since we recorded this show, her father, Jamie Spears, has agreed to step down. But we will revisit that issue of the case at a later date. Now, this show that you're about to see, it goes into detail of what happens with a conservatorship, who it applies to, and when there can be an abuse of powers. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to another episode of Elder Talk. I think you're going to really like the topic this week. Bear with me, those of you who may not immediately see the relevance of this topic, but I'm willing to bet that almost every one of you have heard of Britney Spears.
You think?
I don't know.
Who?
Okay, I mean, this is an audience over age 60, but still, I'm willing to bet at least half of you have heard of Britney Spears. And those who have not, here's what's relevant to all of us as we age. This whole thing about a conservatorship. You don't have to be rich to have a guardianship/conservatorship created for you. In matter of fact, you may be a loved one that would consider perhaps a relative or an aging person who might be the subject of a conservatorship or a guardianship. So this topic is very, very relevant. And it's real to people as they age, but it's also kind of fun in this case because we're going to talk about it in the context of Britney Spears. And those of you who are not aware of this drama that's been unfolding in the news over the last couple of months,
right?
We have Jill here, of course, to give us an overview, but we also have our favorite lawyer, Jim Gau from TuckerAllen. He's going to kind of give it some context too. I think you'll really find this topic not only relevant, but also a lot of fun. So let's start by giving an overview of what this whole case involves.
Right. And what we have to do is we have to go back to 2007 and 2008, which, by the way, back then I was working for a St. Louis radio station on the morning show when all of this was unfolding. And Britney, I'll tell you what, we were never short of material with all of her antics.
She was wild, right?
Yes. But we have to look at what was happening. She and her husband, Kevin Federline, had just divorced in early 2007. And although they were divorced, there was this ongoing custody battle with the two young children, which I believe were like 1 and 2, Sean Preston and Jaden at the time.
They got married and had their first kid
10
months later after they married. Yeah, so they're 1.5 and
right
and a half.
So
they have two kids.
Two kids, Sean Preston and Jaden. And of course, they're growing up now. So there's all of this going on right now. And she's, under an enormous amount of stress with this custody battle. Well, we see her unraveling, erratic behavior, becoming this party girl, hanging out with Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, and some crazy incidents. We remember the shaved head incident, which I want to talk about that later. I'm going to put that back here for right now. I have some comments about that. The other incident where she beat the photographer's car up with an umbrella. And then she fired her longtime manager. So she's making all these crazy decisions at this point in time.
Allegedly crazy.
Allegedly, yes. Well, it was playing out in front of the...
Leave it to a lawyer to insert alleged.
Yeah,
the rest of us would just say crazy. But
yeah, well, it's playing out in front of the TV cameras. And, the pop princess's image is being really shattered. She's dominating entertainment headlines. And one thing that was going on, too, she starts dating this guy named Sam Lufty. And he, by all accounts, is described as one of these guys that's always reinventing himself and attracting himself to celebrities, often at vulnerable times in their life.
Yeah, he did Courtney Love. He was involved with a couple, and I forget who the other one was, but it was always a female celebrity that's starting to have a little bit of issues, and all of a sudden he shows up in the background and is in their ear.
The knight in shining armor.
Kind of a hanger-on, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. And her parents were very concerned about this relationship. They felt that some of her problems stemmed from him. They were making these terrible allegations that he was taking control of her home, her finances. Oh, and she hired him as her manager after firing her longtime manager, which this guy didn't seem to have the experience. The parents also accused him of drugging her, crushing up pills and putting it into her food. We don't know if any of that's true. He denied it. Although once the conservatorship was granted, at least the temporary one, the family did file a restraining order, and it was granted by the court. So all of this is going on, but the two big incidents happened in January of 2008. Okay, the first one, January 3rd. She is at her home with her kids, and she locks herself up in a room with Jaden, the youngest boy, and refuses to give him back to Kevin Federline, who has sole custody. She's only allowed visitation at that point.
Yeah, she was supervised visitation for her two kids, I think 4 days a week.
Yeah. So,
which produced more stress for her during this period.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the police come and an ambulance. They take her away to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, and it's involuntary. So the next day, Kevin Federline, they go for an emergency court hearing, and her visitation is suspended at that point. So then there's another incident like that in late January, like January 31st or something like that, where she's taken back to the hospital for a psych eval. And they said something like she may have been under the influence of drugs. We don't know if that was true or not. But anyway, at that point, that's when Jamie Spears, her father, decides to get a conservatorship, a temporary one.
And it was, I think, what made, at least from my research, what made the family kind of, they'd been talking about it, throwing around the idea of a conservatorship for a little while, I think, since that first incident. But they kind of put it on hold and said maybe she'll get better. And then she came back from this Sam Lufty guy, and it seemed like she was under the influence of drugs.
Right.
So that's when they did the hold. And then she said that none of her family could come back to see her, but they found out that she let the Sam Lufty back to talk to her in her hospital room, and the dad kind of went off the handle and said, that's it, we're doing this conservatorship. Kind of a knee-jerk reaction, which is not typically what you want to do in planning situations like this.
So this had been under discussion some. And about what age was she when this conservatorship came into existence?
26.
26. So focusing then on you, Jim, so describe the legal process that happened at that point.
Yeah, so they filed the petition, and this is, standard operating procedure. This isn't anything special for Britney Spears necessarily, at least procedurally, but they filed the petition. Normally, there is a hearing with testimony given, and they've got psychiatric reports that they get, which I think they tried 3 psychiatrists before they got a favorable one for them.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And that psychiatrist that ended up filing providing the report has since come out on a podcast saying, he doesn't know why she still has a conservatorship. This was kind of all supposed to be temporary. But normally you file the petition. There's testimony given, a guardian ad litem, an advocate is what they call it in California, is appointed to do interviews and kind of make this determination. But that didn't really happen in Britney Spears' case. The judge kind of granted it with no hearing, no testimony, and said that it was all confidential behind-the-scenes discussions that
Well, but
they used.
Did she not cooperate, though, actually consent to the
Yeah, she did. In fact, I highly recommend that our viewers, listeners, watch the Framing Britney Spears documentary that was done by the New York Times. It's very well done. And there was a lawyer involved, Adam Streisand, who the family attorneys asked to talk to Britney. And this is when it was still a temporary situation. So he claims he went to talk with her and they had a pretty good rapport. And she said, I don't think I'm going to get out of this conservatorship and I want you to represent me. And he said, okay. So he goes to court and petitions the court to be her attorney. The judge says, no, I have this medical report, a psych eval, and she's not capable of hiring her own attorney. And Adam Streisand said he never, was able to see what was in that report. He has no idea, but he disagreed with the judge's decision because he felt during their conversation that she was competent enough to make that decision. And there's also speculation that the reason she agreed is because she wanted to see her kids again and she thought this would help her. And that's telling me, too, that she's competent, and even a level of maturity. She's saying, okay, I got to get my act together. I'm going to do whatever I can to get my kids back. And after she did agree to it, she did start getting visitation back with her children.
There's a lot of holding the custody arrangements and stuff over her head throughout this entire process, saying if you don't cooperate, you're not going to see your kids again and stuff like that. A lot of it.
So it sounds like at this point she was kind of just at the bottom. She was at the bottom in everybody's opinion, including her own, apparently. And so perhaps she felt that this is the pathway to restoration, to rehabilitation, was to cooperate. And so she consents to this order, and she didn't realize that, and apparently under California law, there's this presumption, or this practice at least, in which once a conservatorship is created, it's not terminated.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so it was made permanent, I think, in 2009. It was temporary until then, and even family friends that they've interviewed have said, we thought maybe this Sam Lufty was taking advantage of her. We thought it was going to be, and the mom too, her mom Lynn, and the family friend kind of were talking together and working together, and said, maybe this is best for her, but it'll only last a few months, and then it'll be over when she's back on the right track. And it has just spiraled and spiraled and spiraled.
And for a long time, we really didn't hear anything about this case. It doesn't seem like it was until 2019 when the Free Britney movement came about. She really has a loyal base of fans. And they started and I really do credit them for bringing this, this case, so much attention.
So what has she been doing, though, since 2009 up to 2019? Up to the time that we started hearing about her again.
Well, she was performing for a long time in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she had residencies.
So she was earning money.
Lots of it.
Lots of money.
Yeah. I think they said when the conservatorship was put into place, she was they claim she was down to only a few million, which, boo-hoo. But now she's worth about 60.
61, I think.
But it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because they say, look, this conservatorship has done wonders for her. She was squandering all her money. Now she's back at 60 million. So we can't get rid of it. But the other side of the argument, if they're saying that, she's totally capable of making her own decisions and it's great, well, then we can't get rid of it either. And so it's a weird self-fulfilling prophecy where the conservatorship, she doesn't need it, but it's doing so good for her that we got to keep it on her.
Well, and you know what else I want to point out? I don't think her erratic behavior is unique, to Britney Spears. I mean, how many child stars have we seen when they reached adulthood and they unraveled? I mean, you take Dana Plato from Different Strokes, America's Sweetheart, her co-star Todd Bridges.
Mm-hmm.
They all went down the wrong path with drugs and alcohol. Okay, nobody got a conservatorship on them. And I realized they weren't of the same superstar status as Britney Spears, but still, there was money involved.
Yeah. Yeah, and we know that celebrities are notoriously self-destructive, or they have poor judgment. I mean, they are erratic. I mean, it's almost, a badge of distinction amongst many celebrities.
Well, you give a teenager a bunch of money and I can tell you how it's going to end at least half the time.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Right.
How many rock stars would be committed, would now be incompetent? by the standards you just described.
Anyone that went to Studio 54 at one point or another should have had a conservatorship.
Yeah, how many hotel rooms were destroyed by rock stars?
Yeah. Well, a conservatorship, and Britney Spears doesn't really, she's not the poster child of a typical case, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't it usually for someone, an elderly person with dementia?
Yeah, let's set that up. Yeah. Talk about what the criteria are for a conservatorship.
So normally the conservatorship should really be the final resort, your last resort. And so normally when you get to a conservatorship, it's someone that hasn't necessarily done any estate planning. They definitely don't have a power of attorney in place, because the power of attorney eliminates the need for a conservatorship. And normally, if you have a power of attorney in place and someone still files for a conservatorship, your power of attorney says, hey, judge, hold on. I want the people that I named in my power of attorney to be my conservator. So that would have kind of eliminated the entire she doesn't want her dad to be the conservator situation that we find ourselves in. But typically the requirements for a conservatorship are that the person, there's strong testimony and evidence and doctors' reports that say that they can no longer make meaningful financial decisions. They're not capable of making their own decisions anymore. So somebody needs to take over.
Yeah, so the criteria relates to the complete inability to handle money, to take care of your life's needs. Yeah. And it's important, though, to talk about this thing that you kind of brushed over a little bit, because I think people are confused about having in place a durable power of attorney, for example. And we might flesh that out. So if somebody has a durable power of attorney, it's true that if they're willing to let that person do everything for them, that person has the power to do everything for them. I mean, if it's well written and well designed, then you could hand me a good durable power of attorney and you wouldn't have any more responsibilities. I could take care of everything legally. I could do all this stuff for you. The problem is if you're somebody who really, their judgment's really bad, then you're probably not going to be that passive and that acquiescent. So if you push back, or you go out and do things on your own. See, you can legally contract. So though I have this piece of paper, it works without a judge's order, without getting a conservatorship, as long as the person, the what do you call them? The ward, I guess. Yeah. As long as the ward, which in this case is you, as long as you cooperate and don't go out and do crazy stuff. But you've not lost your ability legally to sign a contract, to go out and marry, to do all sorts of things. And a conservatorship stops you from being able to do that. So as long as you're just passive and cooperative, you don't need a conservatorship, like Jim was saying. It's unnecessary.
So it is legal what Britney claims her father has done. I mean, if these allegations are true, I mean, she claims that he controls who she sees. If she can marry, he won't let her have another baby. She claims he made her use birth control, in this case an IUD, and she wanted to have it removed. He would not allow her to do that. That's all legal?
So it's blurring the line, and I think the timelines from my research on that weren't very clear. But for a while, he was conservator both of her financial affairs and basically the guardian of her person.
Until 2019.
You need to explain that.
Yeah.
That's an important point.
So there's two different, and in California, it's confusing because they call them both conservators. But for instance, here in Missouri, we kind of separate it, and we have a conservator who's in charge of financial affairs. And that's the person that the court's going to appoint to manage your banking, manage your finances, pay your bills, things like that, enter into contracts for you. Then there's the guardian of the person who's actually in charge of your health care. So just like powers of attorney, you've got a financial power of attorney, you've got a health care power of attorney. You delineate who's talking to the doctors, who's talking to the banks. For a while, her dad was he was both positions. He's since resigned from the conservator, the guardianship, the guardian of the person, and he's been replaced there. So for a while, those decisions sound like he could have done them as long as he was the person and the financial.
So I'm going to repeat a little bit of that at the risk of boring some of you, just to be sure it's clear. I'd rather be redundant on this show than to leave you confused. And I think Jim explained it well. and that's that conservatorship, guardianship. Think of these as two different people. It could be the same person. Forget that California calls it two different types of conservatorship. Missouri does it well. Guardianship, which is control over your person, your doctors, as you said. And then the other is a conservatorship, which is about your assets, financial matters in your life, all those things. Those are often two different people, but they don't have to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I still don't understand how that is legal with someone like Britney Spears. I mean, we're not talking about somebody with a diminished mental capacity. Maybe she's a little crazy. I don't know. But come on, think about it. She's been performing all these years, and in recent years, she has refused to continue to perform as long as her dad is on her conservatorship.
Yep.
Well, couldn't there just be a conservatorship and not a guardianship at all?
There could be, and a lot of the times that happens. I'm not. I'm assuming because there were a lot of trips to rehab that they were organizing for her and things like that. That it falls under the umbrella of guardian of the persons, because that's considered healthcare, mental health treatment and stuff like that. So that's probably what they wanted to get her in rehab at the very beginning of this.
And maybe custody-based stuff too.
Potentially, yeah.
When the children were minors.
Yeah.
But having a baby, I mean,
so that's a good. It's kind of an interesting road to walk down. So if you think, at the end of the day, a conservatorship or a guardianship it's a contested proceeding, and so there's a part of Britney's case where they were supposed to. So at the beginning of a conservatorship, you file the petition. Whoever's petitioning to be that guardian or that conservator, you file the petition, and then the ward is entitled to notice. Because you're stripping them of their rights, they're entitled to notice and due process. They waived the requirement in California at the very beginning.
Who waived? She waived it?
The judge waived it. And so there's an exemption, at least under California law, that says, they're due 15 days notice of these proceedings against them. But if notice would put them in harm's way, then they can waive it. It's kind of an emergency procedure.
Okay.
Because I'm assuming some people get that notice and then try and kill themselves or something.
Yeah. Or they can't be reached.
Right.
And they're still wanting the authority.
Yep. Yeah. So they waived that for Britney. So that's kind of touching on yours. It seems almost impossible that this person is making these kind of meaningful decisions.
I know. That's so intimate. Even a child who we agree, for example, doesn't need a conservatorship because they don't have, they're regarded by law as they are not capable of entering into contracts and doing certain things. But I think, certainly in California, I'd be willing to bet that a parent cannot force a 13-year-old child to have an abortion.
Yeah.
Knowing California.
Or even to be on birth control.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm surprised that they could impose that on her in California. But it does make you wonder about a guardianship. A couple other things that we might say to communicate how grave this proceeding is. Anything that touches on our constitutional liberties, the law regards as hugely serious. So, you can go down the list in your mind. An order that's going to restrict your ability to have free speech. All sorts of things, your loss of property even. These are constitutional issues, and they're often taken very seriously. Criminal proceedings, that's the ultimate. You have all these hurdles and protections for a defendant in a criminal proceeding because how can you offend someone's constitutional rights more fully than to deprive them of the ability to walk around wherever they want, meaning imprisoning them? That really, it's of that nature that a guardianship is. So it's regarded as hugely serious. And so guardianships are not casually entered into. And that's what makes this case so interesting is they're regarded as a very grave, constitutionally poignant sort of matter. And often, there are lots of protections built in. Because none of us wants to think that we can go out of town and our kids will have us declared incompetent and we come back in town and find that there are guardians. Yeah.
Well,
that's a scary thought.
She does make these allegations. It has been like she's been in prison. She said there have been times where she's had bodyguards around her in her own home. We're not talking when she's out, performing. That's obvious. But in her own home. Medical people watching her in her own home. And it does seem like overkill to me. And we're talking about Britney Spears. She is someone that has been, a superstar. And in fact, several people that are close to her, one of the people with Jive Records, where she got her first record deal, she described her as, even meeting her at the age of 15, as a girl coming from strength. She said she was so focused, as a teenager. And then some of those who were on her, the dancers and her tour manager said Britney had absolute control. She knew what she wanted. And she said, okay, we're going to do this dance this way. We're going to do this that way. And she was someone of control.
Well, okay, which I guess says that she can be. But we all agree that she kind of went nuts later. But she probably went nuts like the average rock star.
Yeah.
Or anybody that's going through a child custody case.
Yeah, well, okay,
or a divorce, right?
A bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was normal everyday stuff. I mean, she had a breakup with Justin Timberlake and then went on kind of a party streak and started going to clubs, and that was the Lindsay Lohan, Paris Hilton phase. And then she gets married and divorced, and now she's got custody issues. So there was stuff going on.
Right. There was stuff going on. And I guess I want to even grant that she was exercising exceptionally bad judgment and still argue that it's not the subject normally of a guardianship. I mean, I'll add one additional point to what I was making a while ago about how grave this is. Think about it. When you're under the order of a conservatorship or guardianship, you cannot enter into any contract. You have not the power to contract to buy anything. You can't go to a store and apply for a credit card because your signature would have no validity. You might as well be 5 years old filling out that because it's not enforceable. You can't marry. You can't choose where to live. I mean, imagine having the authority of a 5 or 6 year old as a rich 30-year-old person.
Yeah,
and it's the ultimate loss of freedom. Is what you're talking about. You're talking about a conservatorship.
And oddly enough, it's circular reasoning as well. So Britney has tried multiple times, and she's finally gotten petitions through to get a lawyer retained for her. But at the beginning, she was trying to fight it and have her dad removed and trying to hire attorneys. I think she went through 2 or 3 that the attorneys would show up for court with a petition in hand, and the judge said, no, you're not her attorney. She doesn't have the mental capacity to hire an attorney. So get out of my courtroom. So how circular.
A scary situation.
Is that due to also because of Sam Ingham, who was her longtime court-appointed attorney, which some sources say, according to that New Yorker article, that he was more loyal to Jamie Spears when he was supposed to be representing her. Yeah. And in fact, he tried to talk her out of petitioning to have her dad removed. And now she did have a victory on July 14th when the judge said, okay, you can hire Matthew Rosengart, who's a former federal prosecutor, and he has since then filed a petition to have Jamie Spears removed.
And replaced with the CPA. He's not even saying
Jason
the conservatorship should go away. He's just saying this is an abrasive situation, and it's borderline abusive from all reports. Just get him out of there. It's healthier for everybody, and appoint a CPA, a professional person that can manage finances. That's literally their job and training.
Yeah. And maybe dump a guardianship entirely.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know why that's still around, but it doesn't seem like the guardianship of her person is that big of a point of contention anymore. I think she's got a friendly face in that role now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jody Montgomery.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting about that? And tell me if you find this suspicious. Those who should have, or you would think, would have been speaking up for her, such as Jody Montgomery, her mother. Well, since her testimony on June 23rd, they're all coming out and saying, yes, Jamie Spears needs to be removed. Is it that they really care, or they don't want to end up on the wrong side of the story and look like the bad actors?
It's hard to.
mean,
you can be sure there's some of that.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I think they can see, which way the river's flowing here.
Yeah,
and I think that they recognize that they can either try now to be on her good side, or they'll be shut out as she gains more freedom. I mean, when you have a public outcry this strong in support of someone, I think that public pressure, not to mention that it's odd, it strikes the average person that when you think how low the bar is for you to be able to live in freedom as a free human being, how low that bar is, you have the right to live on the street, to sleep in carts and crates in L.A. I mean, and where these courts are saying that her behavior was such that she should be deprived of the liberties of a free human being. And yet you have behavior that's far worse. And that's the reason I don't think that you have to predicate an argument on her behalf on the notion that it really wasn't that bad what she did. I think you can grant everything that people were saying, and given the low threshold, thankfully, that exists for us to be free, the right to do stupid stuff, the right to blow a fortune. Imagine if somebody who is wasteful with the money they earn, which is the average rock star, for example, that if that made you incompetent, then imagine Mick Jagger. Well, Mick Jagger did pretty well with his money. But anyway, you go down the list. Who would we think? Everybody in Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Yeah. I mean, all these rock stars that we like today and those who are alive today, you know, they would tell you that their behavior, most of their career was worse than anything that Britney Spears has done.
Right.
And who would have thought they should be locked up?
Look at somebody like Robert Downey Jr. Now he's Iron Man, and he was off the rails for years with drugs and alcohol and rehab and in and out of rehab. And,
good point.
And he's no conservatorship there, and now he's one of the most famous people on the planet because he's Iron Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the reason. And I think we have to resist the idea that, and it's tempting to me, the point that you said some would point to that she had, what, $1 million or something, not much, few $1 million at one time at the bottom, say in 2008, and now she's up to $60 million, and it's one point to say it's working. I mean, if that were the standard, think of how many people would be subject to conservatorships. Yeah. They would lose their freedom to manage their affairs.
And also, her case has attracted the attention of lawmakers. There was legislation just introduced.
Yeah, it was the Free Britney Act or something.
Free Britney Act. I mean, and who knows where that's going to go, but that really is interesting. And let's talk about, I wanted to get back to the incident, the head shaving incident, okay? And that was one of the incidents that, you know, everyone's thinking she's crazy, needs help. Okay, when I first saw it, I thought she was crazy too. But when it was explained through this documentary, apparently, you know, the paparazzi's constantly following her around, especially during this stressful time. And this one day, she just had it. And the incident happened near a hair salon. So she goes into the hair salon, asks them to shave her head. And, you know, they, of course, said, no, you're Britney Spears, not going to do that. So she grabs the clippers and shaves all of her beautiful blonde hair off and goes outside. And what she said to them, she said, okay, the girl you want no longer exists. Leave me alone. So that was like her saying, I've had it, I'm done. But unfortunately, it backfired because the media ate it up. It just, you know, exploded.
I don't know, Jill. I wouldn't lead with that argument.
But no, but she's making a statement. I mean, okay, most people wouldn't do something that drastic, but you got to consider she's Britney Spears. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine being followed around everywhere like that?
No.
And finally, you lose your cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I would, my inclination is not to even push back and try to explain any of these things, is to say, yeah, you're right. But does that mean you lose your freedom?
Yeah.
Well,
and you know, we're allowed to do. Sinead O'Connor, was that her name?
Sinead O'Connor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she shaved her head and kept it shaved for a long time.
Years.
And so, you know, people are allowed to do weird and crazy things.
And it sounds like what she was trying to do was probably something actually mentally healthy for her and making a statement to herself. You know, and kind of, and it backfired on her.
More than being a pop star.
Yeah.
And two, at that time, you remember she was losing her pop star figure. Mm-hmm. She was letting herself go. But in all fairness, she just had 2 babies, you know.
Yeah. And her dad was calling her fat and putting her on a diet. And, yeah, I'm sure that was healthy for her.
That was,
So I guess there are many many points I guess we can make about this situation. There's lots of learning opportunities here. And again, you don't have to be a rich star, an eccentric rich star, in order to learn a lot from this. But, conservatorships are a marvelous thing, and guardianships are a marvelous thing for the right people in the right circumstance. But they don't envision a conclusion, really. And we'll make this our last point, just so people are clear. There is such thing as a temporary guardianship, a temporary conservatorship. And now there's been something new added to the law. I don't know about California, but a lot of states have adopted it in an effort to mitigate the sort of hardships or the shocking situations, some of similar to what we're describing, but others as well, where a conservatorship or guardianship was imposed and there really weren't the facts for it. And we can imagine how that could happen easily. So it's such a dangerous thing that the law has decided that, look, we need something other than a full-range sort of guardianship that includes, the whole package of limitations, et cetera, and conservatorship. And so there's a uniform statute that I think Missouri has adopted for limited guardianship, limited conservatorship. And so this option is a fairly recent development in the law. I don't know when this started being adopted by states, but used to, in order to grant a conservatorship, you had this plain vanilla full-blown option or nothing. And so these were being granted. And once you had a temporary order, the temporary, not to confuse you, it's an order that's not intended to be very long. It's usually for purposes of determining do we need to have one in place, or if there's some really rare circumstance where it's expected they're going to emerge from this pretty quickly and it's temporary. So, but for the most part, the temporary is issued just to figure out if there need to be one. So really, as a practical matter, when they issue one, it goes on indefinitely, and it's a lot harder to get back into court and end it than it is to get it issued. So I think that you have to recognize that when you're thinking about a guardianship for a loved one, or you think that you might be on the receiving end of one, they're not necessarily evil. They have a marvelous purpose. We've been putting them down here, but maybe we ought to do a show where we talk about how wonderful they are. For people who need them, they're wonderful.
Yeah.
And so, but now there is a limited option, and where you can the court. As a matter of fact, the legislatures now encourage judges to use the language that they use, or something to the effect of the least invasive or the least intrusive.
Least restrictive environment.
That's it. The least restrictive environment. That's the phrase. And so really judges are ordered to do that. In this case, couldn't it have been a limited guardianship for her?
I mean, this is the most restrictive environment. She can't have a cell phone. She sneaks around when she goes to people's houses and borrows cell phones and has people sneak her burner phones in steam rooms and stuff like that. So, yeah, I would say this is the most restrictive environment she can be in.
And she told the judge, I want my father investigated and charged with conservatorship abuse. So are we talking criminal charges here?
Yeah,
possibly?
At that point, yeah. That would be under a criminal statute.
But I really doubt that. Yeah. I mean, I would be surprised if he had engaged in criminal activity, because he knew he would be under the spotlight eventually. And I tend to think that, look, you can do it, you can play it correctly, dot your I's and cross your T's and do nothing vaguely illegal and still make a lot of money being the guardian or the conservator. You're entitled by statute. In Missouri, it's a pretty lucrative deal, right? You don't know what the statute reads, do you?
No.
Those percentages?
Oh, it mirrors, I believe, the probate schedule. Yeah. So it's somewhere between 5 to 10%.
I mean, it's profitable. You don't have to do anything dishonest in order to make money.
And the odd thing to me is that, and that's obviously why he's fighting so hard to stay in the position he's in, is because he's making money. But he's also negotiating deals. So when he signed for her Vegas residency contracts, he had it built in a clause that said the agreement is terminated if the conservatorship goes away. And he's cutting himself into 1.5% of marketing money and things like that. So he's got a vested interest in remaining in that spot. So it doesn't surprise me. And he's using her money to fight her. And stay in the conservatorship position, which is odd to me.
That seems unfair.
And there's other people on the conservatorship that want her money to fight their legal situation. Well, Jody Montgomery, she claimed she was getting death threats, and so she wanted money out of her estate to pay for bodyguards for her.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you had a bunch of people who were enjoying being in control in the regime. And then suddenly there's this palace coup, and suddenly you're trying to decide, do you want to stay in the governing regime and risk the consequences of losing? Or do you want to jump sides and see that this revolution where she's going to gain control? And I do think what you suspected, if you're involved in this, you probably recognize that she's likely to prevail eventually, with this much momentum, and you wouldn't want to be on the side that would be subject to her litigation and accusations.
No.
And I think it's going to come to a head here pretty shortly, because when in December of 20, so this past December, they extended the guardianship or the conservatorship to September of this year. So we're coming up on when it's kind of set to be reevaluated anyway.
Well, September 29th, I believe, is the next court hearing where the judge will rule on Matthew Rosengard's petition.
Oh, to have him removed?
To have the dad removed and replaced with Jason Rupin, the CPA.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, but we try to make these conversations fun, but we also want you to learn a lot and see some relevance to your own life. So we didn't get a chance to flesh that out as much. But as we age, conservatorships and guardianships really are a potentially marvelous way to protect people we care for, to be protected if you're in the situation. So we've kind of given it a little bit of a black eye here, but only in the context that we've described. And I think you can see the difference, how in this case versus the typical person who might be much older and might be much more vulnerable and who can be hugely benefited by something like this. And it's not unusual for such a person to fully cooperate where they recognize their vulnerabilities.
Right. And I mean, at the end of the day, I know we're coming on here. It's kind of like the horror story of the conservatorships. But like you said, they're not all bad. They serve a purpose, otherwise they wouldn't exist. But they can be avoided with just proper estate planning and coming into an estate planning attorney like TuckerAllen. You can get the documents in place so that we don't have to go to court. We don't have to get all this potentially damaging information and potentially damaging conservatorship in place.
And you just made the best point. So, and thank you for that, because the obvious answer is to not have to use one at all and instead do a durable power of attorney. As I said, there are a few cases where it may not be enough, but the substantial majority of cases, I mean, that does it. You avoid this ugliness. And Britney Spears is paying for all of this litigation. She's paying for both sides of this war. It's coming out of her money. And the same thing happens for Bill and Sue Jones, or the typical aging person who finds that there's a conservatorship going on. If there is a dispute, it's being paid for with or without a dispute. It's being paid for out of your money if you're the one who would be the ward. Now,
one thing, if she would not have agreed, could it have been done anyway?
Yeah, they had a psychological report. Like I said, it was the third psychiatrist that they gave it to him and has since kind of backpedaled. But something was going on. I mean, they had enough evidence, but I think from everything I've heard and read from statements from the family, they fully thought this was going to be a temporary thing. And I think the dad, Jamie, just kind of gripped it and wouldn't let go. Yeah.
Yeah. So time has flown. I hope you've enjoyed this and found it helpful. This has been another episode of Elder Talk. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Elder Talk with TuckerAllen, providing intelligent answers for those thinking about their future, with Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell. Sponsored by TuckerAllen, your estate and elder law advisors. For more information, visit TuckerAllen.com. Listen again next Saturday for another edition of Elder Talk with TuckerAllen. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.